The Presbyterian Church decided to call a meeting because they had a problem. It was a squirrel infestation in the church. You know that you've heard this joke before, right? Now, we actually had that problem. We had raccoons last summer. Also, I went on a 10-week sabbatical, and I said, make sure there's no raccoons when I get back. And when I got back, the first thing that greeted me was a raccoon. Well, this particular Presbyterian church, they had squirrels, but they got together, the session met, and they concluded that they were predestined to be there, so they just left them. It was God's divine will. Well, the Baptist church, now they also had problems with squirrels, and they got together with their board and decided what we really need to do is take advantage of the baptismal tank at the front, and they installed a water slide, and they thought, they'll drown and take care of the problem. The problem is squirrels really know how to swim, so by the next week there was just twice as many squirrels swimming away in their baptismal tank. The Lutheran Church, being the kind-hearted people that they are, they decided that they were not in a place to harm any of God's creatures. So they just humanely trapped the squirrels and they set them free right next to the Baptist church. 2 weeks later, the squirrels were back when the Baptists decided to take down the water slide. Well, the Anglicans, they had a much more unique path. They decided, we've got all of this communion wine, we'll just set out trays of wine and let alcohol poisoning do the job for us. But it turns out that a pack of drunk squirrels in your church is a real mess. A real mess. The Catholic Church, they came up with a very creative strategy. They just took them, confirmed them, baptized them, and made them members. Not a squirrel came back the next week. Now, during all of this hubbub and rigmarole in this little town filled with squirrels, the little Jewish synagogue was strangely silent on the problem. I guess the very first sign, the very first squirrel that showed up, they just circumcised him. And not a single squirrel came back. You know, every Christian denomination has its unique way of doing things, its own unique traditions and theologies and approaches to faith, and of course, squirrels, as it were. It can be hard sometimes to keep them all straight, right? To understand why we think the way we do and why we do the things we do, and why when I go to a Pentecostal church is everyone raising their hands, and then I come to my church and everyone's sitting on them. Why do we do the things we do? And even as Presbyterians, we can have a hard time understanding our own tradition, especially if we're new to that tradition. And Knox has a number of people new to this tradition. And this was made clear to me a number of weeks ago. I was absent because I was asked by our presbytery to visit another congregation on their behalf. I had a small team. Al was with me, and a wonderful woman named Mary from Elmvale, and we went and visited this church. And the idea of these visitations, which happen every 4 or 5 years, is to just, make sure that everything's being done in proper order, but also if there are any issues or any troubles, presbytery wants to support and help them. So we were called in to simply ask questions and meet with everybody. And at the end of it, I said to the congregation, is there anything presbytery can do for you? And one person put up their hand and said, yeah, you can tell me what a presbytery is. Now, it became apparent to me at that time that a lot of us don't understand what a presbytery is, what a session is, really why and how we do things as a church. So, I know this is not the most exciting topic on the planet. I understand that. But I think it's important to understand who we are and how we operate. And so today I'd like to talk about leadership in the Presbyterian Church in Canada, or, if you will, the PCC. Well, 1759, Great Britain gained control of the colony of New France, seized during the 7 Years' War. The plains of Abraham outside the walled citadel of Quebec. I remember in grade 7 visiting it and rolling down the hill outside this citadel in Quebec. Now, among the victors was a Scottish battalion, the 78th Fraser Highlanders. And along with them was a Presbyterian chaplain. His name was Reverend Robert McPherson. Boy, is that a good Presbyterian minister or chaplain's name? It really is. Reverend Robert McPherson. The group from this chaplain and these soldiers became the roots of St. Andrew's Church in Montreal. Meanwhile, in the colony of Nova Scotia, Reformed settlers, mostly of Germanic roots, started St. Andrew's Church in Lunenburg in 1753. So our roots are going back into the 1700s. They eventually joined the Church of Scotland's Nova Scotia Synod in 1837. Well, from there, Presbyterians of various backgrounds began to settle in the Lower Canada and in the Maritimes, eventually moving west into Upper Canada and, of course, beyond. And most traced their religious affiliations to some kind of Scottish tradition that had made its way, and some traced their roots to Presbyterians in the South who came up from across the border. So I want to fast forward to June 15th, 1875, where 4 Canadian Presbyterian denominations gathered together and they joined together to form the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Well, this is when we were formed. And they did so in Montreal's Victoria Hall, which is kind of interesting because I did some research on that building. It was one of the first indoor skating rinks. It was a huge venue, and like many skating rinks in the summer months when the ice was gone, they had all kinds of conferences and concerts and things like that. And so this hall has the distinction of being the location of the first organized indoor hockey game. Now, how uniquely Canadian is it that our tradition was born in a hockey rink, of all places, transformed into a beautiful hall? I really think this does capture the essence of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and that we're heavily influenced by theology and culture of our various mother churches, but we bring a unique Canadian vibe to all that we do. Well, I want to now get into the structure of our leadership, and I'm going to start at the top, which may not be actually where the strength of our leadership comes from, per se. I want to talk about General Assembly. General Assembly is a national assembly of delegates, or what we call commissioners. It's the highest court in our denomination. It's called the General Assembly since that date that the Presbyterian Church was formed. And General Assembly is really unique because it's the highest court of our church, but it only is active for 4 days in the month of June. Isn't that interesting? If you are familiar with the Roman Catholic Church, you could kind of think of them as our Pope, but it's a collection of people, not a single individual. It has no permanent existence, which is kind of neat. So what happens is commissioners, delegates, are sent from the various presbyteries all across Canada. A few weeks ago, I was in Halifax, Nova Scotia for General Assembly, and people from all over Canada were there. There were about 200 commissioners or so, all gathered at St. Mary's University. And along with us were young adult representatives, which is kind of neat. And the young adult representatives don't have voting privileges, but they have an advisory vote. So sometimes before an important vote, the YARs, as we call them, would say we'd like to have an advisory vote, and the young people would vote on the topic. And I'll tell you, the court, those commissioners who had voting privileges, strongly factored in the opinion of the young people. Now, the interesting thing about the delegates is it's about 1/6 of the membership of every presbytery that goes. So our presbytery, having near 60 representatives, sent 6 people. 3 teaching elders, 3 ruling elders. What's the difference? The teaching elder is the pastor, and the ruling elder is an active elder from your congregation. So, you with me so far? Is this the most exciting stuff you've ever heard? Yeah, I knew it. Now, the moderator is elected annually, and they hold that position from the start of General Assembly to the start of the General Assembly the following year. And the moderator is elected to that position nationally, which is kind of cool. And what does General Assembly look at? Well, they basically, and they're supported, of course, by Assembly Council, who work year-round to basically take care of the business from the previous assembly and set forth the next assembly. How many of you have heard of 50 Winford Drive? Al has. You have. 50, okay, a few of you. 50 Winford Drive has a huge impact on your life. It's in the north end of Toronto, and it's the head offices of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And if you go online to presbyterian.ca, you can see all the staff there and all the things that they do. Teams and committees, a missions group, and education coordinators, and all kinds of things that are there to support the local churches. And Assembly Council is part of that. And really what we do for 4 days is we look at the, we look at the business of the church. So this is from the Book of Forms. General Assembly receives and disposes of petitions, overtures, references, complaints, appeals from lower courts, and all other matters regularly brought before it. It reviews the records of synods, deals with matters respecting doctrine and worship, discipline, and government of the church, prescribes and regulates the course of study of students, having ministry in view, and it goes on. So, as you can tell, General Assembly is the most fun experience you'll ever have. Well, okay, it actually might be a little dry. We meet from 9 in the morning till 9 at night with breaks for meals in between for 3.5 days, really. But it is really, really crucial. And what do you notice about the highest court in the Presbyterian Church in Canada? Well, the moderator is elected. It's a gathering of people from all across Canada, from all of our presbyteries, and everything is done democratically. Everything is voted on. And so while it functions like a pope, think of it as like a pope with 200 people that have been preparing all year to make these decisions. I won't say that it's a fast process by any means, but for us as Presbyterians, we believe this is a fundamental principle that God speaks most clearly in community. God speaks most clearly in community. So all our courts are oriented around community. Well, let's move on. Synod. How many of you have never heard of Synod? Never heard of it? A few of you? Okay. So Synod is something a lot of people don't know anything about. Even if you have heard of it, you probably don't know what it does. Synod is sort of a go-between General Assembly and presbyteries. It's kind of caught somewhere in the middle. Synod is arranged geographically, and we have actually 8 synods across Canada. We're in the Synod of Northeastern Ontario and Bermuda, and so you can see, for some reason, Bermuda got stuck in with us, part of our presbytery, and it's always fun when the minister finally makes their way up for some kind of meeting. It's an annual conference usually, just like General Assembly. Some do it every other year, and more than that, it is usually a support role. So they have an annual conference which usually focuses on camping ministries, which are run by the synods these days, but it functions in a support and oversight role. In our synod, I think the biggest function is that support role that it plays. So it's composed of all ministers and elders on the role of the presbyteries within the bounds. However, at its own initiative, the synod may decide to function through commissioners appointed by its several presbyteries, and that's what happens once a year. They appoint commissioners. I've done it, and we go for about half a day. They look at camping ministries, children, youth, and young adult ministry, promoting educational opportunities, and all kinds of stuff. Now, I want to draw your attention to this good-looking couple on the screen. You might know them. This is Tori and John Peter Smith, and they are our two synod full-time staff. And many of you will know JP because he's helped out Knox on more than one occasion. He's an amazing resource guy, and his specialty is church growth and reconciliation in when the congregation is in conflict, those kinds of things. And Tori has an amazing gifting towards children's ministry and youth ministry and curriculum and all that kind of stuff. And so we've actually utilized both of them here at Knox in my tenure over the last 12 years. They are both retiring at the end of the year. So we'll see what happens in our synod with the staff, because as the denomination shrinks, the funding shrinks. And the synod, which I think used to play a pretty crucial role in the lives of our churches within its bounds, are now dwindling down and down. Well, let's talk about presbyteries. You've heard me talk about presbytery before. Presbyteries are more of the local leadership in that they are also regional, but far smaller than a synod. Our presbytery, the Presbytery of Barrie, if you know where Alliston is, you know where Huntsville is, well, those are sort of the opposite bounds with Barrie in the middle. It's a fairly large presbytery, but when I was at General Assembly, I met people in more rural locations where it's a 6-hour drive from one end to the other in their presbytery. When I was in West Toronto, it was about 40 minutes from the furthest congregation to the other side. So it really depends on how many churches are within your bounds. So presbyteries have a clerk, which is a part-time paid position, and that clerk is someone who understands our polity really well, keeps the records, keeps us on track, and all that kind of stuff. A moderator, who is a member of presbytery, who is elected annually, and then the executive team, which supports the moderator and the clerk, and then ministry teams, which do the work of the presbytery. Meet monthly, all of that. So, the constitution of people in a presbytery is the ministers and an elder for each minister within those bounds. So I'm a member of presbytery, and you have a representative elder, and that is our very own Al Vermeulen. Give us a wave, Al, so everyone can see you. There we go. Yeah, Al goes to all of the meetings, and if you have any questions about presbytery, you can speak to Al. Oversight is part of presbytery's purview, but the beating heart of presbytery is support for local congregations. If they have to provide oversight, it's because they believe that it will help you succeed, but they want to support you. So what they want to do is deal with calls and transitions. So if you have a minister incoming or outgoing, they're the one that handles that. Technically, I'm hired by the presbytery, not by the congregation, because when you called me almost 13 years ago, you had to then go to presbytery and ask their permission to do so. So I'm also accountable to them, which means if my sermon goes too long, you can call up the moderator of presbytery and complain. I'm kidding, they don't want to hear about that. So we deal with calls and transition business as it arises. We have a representative elder. The teaching elder is a representative of presbytery, so that's me. So when I sit in on session, I am there on behalf of presbytery as the representative to moderate. I mentioned that we got $8,000 to help with this AV stuff. Well, presbytery helped us out from their experimental fund. So those are the kinds of ways that presbytery can support us. They get involved if a congregation has conflict, they can mediate that conflict. If they have a problem with their minister, then they can help try to figure that out and navigate those waters. If there's an issue of theology, we'll have debates about that. And presbytery really is a fantastic way to support the congregations within its bounds. In the presbytery of Barrie, we have an executive team, we have a ministry and leadership team, we have a mission and revitalization team, which is the best one, because I'm the chair of that team. We have a lot of fun in that team because our mandate is really to provide 3 teaching events per year on various topics, and we're going to have an elders training event in the fall. So if you are an elder or thinking of becoming one in the future, you would be advised to go to that October 21st. Care and support team. This team comes in when there's difficulty in a church or if there's any care and support, ironically, that is needed. So let's talk about the session, because I'm getting tired of talking about this, so you're probably getting tired of hearing about it. The session is the organizational leadership that you're most familiar with because it comes from your congregation. The session meets monthly, although we often meet outside of our planned meeting if something is happening, and we usually take July and August off if we can, although over the last 3 or 4 years we haven't been able to take really any month off with COVID and all of that. It's the teaching elder, which is your minister, and active ruling elders. In the Presbyterian Church in Canada, when you're ordained as an elder, it's for life. It's a lifetime thing. But we participate in something that is a little bit different than what some traditional churches do, which is you're an elder when you're 25 and you're an active elder when you're 85, and then you die, and then you're no longer an elder. We have something called term eldership, which is a 6-year term. And so that's why we have elections every 2 years, as 1/3 is supposed to go off and 1/3 come on. All right. I'm going to skip forward here. So this is kind of important. I'll go back. I touched on it. Okay, I can't go back. The minister serves a dual role on the session. The minister is a teaching elder, is an active elder in the congregation, but is also representative of presbytery. And so my job when I sit down and moderate session is to make sure that good order is being kept, that everyone is communicating clearly, that there's a clear agenda and things are moving forward. And my job is to allow those elders to hear the Spirit's voice and make decisions based upon that. And the eldership in the church is, according to the Book of Forms, a spiritual function. It's something that is instituted in the Word of God. The qualifications can be found in the Scriptures. So here you go. You're elected for life in some churches, but in ours, it's a 6-year term. And you can stand for re-election if you're interested in doing so. What are the responsibilities of the session? The session's job is really spiritual care and oversight of the congregation. They are technically responsible for everything that happens in the church, the sale of a building, the budgeting, but also the pastoral care and the spiritual oversight. And so the session is to be praying for and caring for the people within its bounds. The spiritual health, community building, pastoral care, mission and outreach, programming, even stewardship, all of these things are the purview of the session. Now, in our church, we don't have a board. We have a property and finance team. It's a ministry team of session. But really quickly, let me tell you what a board is to do. They're appointed annually at the annual meeting. They deal with more practical matters so that session can focus usually more on spiritual matters. And so it's a wonderful relationship between the board and the session. They talk about things like maintenance, financial budgeting, stewardship, and banking and investments. Is the grass being cut? Is the snow being cleared? Those practical things. So while the session is technically responsible for all of that, the board takes that weight off of their shoulders in order to allow the session to focus more on mission and outreach and pastoral care and things of that nature. Now let's talk about members, our members. Well, members are approved by session, so if you want to become a member, speak to me, and I bring it to session, and we usually have a little 5-week course where we make sure that you understand what it means to be a member and the theology of PCC and all of that, and then approval is granted. It's admitted by confession, so when you become a member, you stand up here and you confess your faith, or it's admitted by transfer if you're coming from another church where you have already admitted by confession. The roll is supposed to be revised annually. The roll of membership, the list of names of who is a voting member. Every year we're supposed to evaluate that roll as a session and make sure that people are attending that are members. And we usually don't say, well, we haven't seen you in 3 weeks, you're off the roll. But if someone has moved out of town, if someone hasn't been attending for a few years and we've reached out, would you like to come back, and we get no answer, then we, with regret, remove them from the roll. A member has voting privileges. So a member has opportunity to vote on budgeting, on big decisions, and, of course, in the calling of a minister. And, of course, a member has responsibilities. When you vote in a budget, you are saying, I will support this budget. So, and when you call a minister, you take a vow to support that minister, for example. So those are our members. Now, in the beginning, I put up this slide on leadership. And I put up this particular slide because it stood out to me. You've got that one yellow pencil standing up, leading the way. But that's not how we do it here, is it? We believe as Presbyterians that God speaks most clearly in community. And so our leadership structure looks more like this. Everybody brings their own giftings, their own unique personalities, their own history, and of course their own understanding of the Word to the local church, to the synod, to the presbyteries, to General Assembly, and together we somehow believe that with all of these voices, we can discern and hear the Holy Spirit leading us in the mission of Jesus Christ to bring the good news to the world. And so I think this is a better leadership metaphor, although I think personally I'd be more comfortable placing Jesus at the center instead of our denominational affiliation, wouldn't you? Yeah. So, any questions? All right. Well, this has been the most fun sermon I've ever preached on the denomination and its governance structure. But hopefully you'll have found it interesting and informative and understand how we do things a little bit better. Because if you understand how we operate, then you can find the care and support you need better because you know where to go for the resources that you need. Let's pray.